Watch this every day. There are moments in life when you don't need another plan, another strategy, another opinion. What you truly need is a reminder of who you are and what you carry inside you. A reminder that your strength did not come from the days that were easy. It came from the nights you thought you wouldn't make it and still found a way to rise. It came from the battles nobody saw, the tears you wiped in silence, the storms you walked through when the world expected you to drown. You are not standing here because life has been gentle. You are standing because something in you refused to break. Every day when you wake up, the world will try to tell you who to be, how to feel, what to fear, and what to settle for. But you must answer with something stronger than the noise around you. You must answer with a voice within you, the voice that says, I am still here. I am still fighting. I am still growing. The voice that refuses to let your past define you, that refuses to let your doubts blind you, that refuses to let your circumstances convince you that this is where your story ends. There's a version of you that you haven't met yet. Stronger, wiser, more focused, more disciplined, more alive. But that version will not appear through wishful thinking. It appears when you decide every single day to show up for yourself, to do the work, to silence the noise, to rise even when the weight feels impossible. Growth is not built in comfort. It is built in decision. It is built in discipline. It is built in the quiet moments when no one is cheering, when no one is watching, when the only thing pushing you forward is the fire inside your chest, reminding you that you were made for more. You do not need permission to become who you were meant to be. You do not need applause to keep going. You do not need understanding from people who were never assigned to your calling. What you need is the courage to insist on your own future, even when your present feels confusing. What you need is to bet on yourself, even when you don't have the full picture yet. You don't have to know everything to move forward. You just have to take one step, and then another, and then another. Because the path is revealed to those who walk, not to those who wait. Every day, speak life into your spirit. Remind yourself that you are allowed to start over. Remind yourself that progress is not always loud. Remind yourself that healing is not weakness and rest is not quitting. Remind yourself that failure is not the opposite of success. It is the instruction manual for it. Every great story includes chapters you don't want to reread. But every chapter, even the painful ones, is preparing you for the greater pages ahead. You cannot afford to forget your own power. Not now. Not after everything you've survived, not after all the storms you walked through, not after all the times you thought you'd break, but you didn't. There is more in you than you've allowed yourself to believe. There is purpose in you that hasn't even touched the surface yet. There are dreams in your heart that still have time to unfold. You are not late, you are not behind, you are in preparation. So watch this every day. Not because the world needs to be reminded, but because you do. Because your spirit needs fuel. Your mind needs direction. Your heart needs courage. And your purpose needs you fully awake. Rise. You didn't come this far just to come this far. Your mind believes what you repeat. It does not wait to see evidence first. It does not pause to analyze whether the words you feed it are true, false, exaggerated, or outdated. Your mind simply absorbs repetition as reality. When you say something to yourself often enough, your thoughts stop being suggestions and start becoming instructions. That is the quiet power behind every internal dialogue you hold. The human brain is constantly adapting, rewiring, strengthening, pruning, according to the patterns it encounters. This means that whatever you repeat, whether empowering or destructive, becomes the blueprint your mind uses to construct your actions, emotions, and expectations. A person who repeatedly says, I can't, is not simply describing a moment of difficulty. They are teaching the mind to retreat. A person who says, I'm trying, is not declaring commitment. They are training the mind to stay in a state of almost, a state without completion. But someone who tells themselves, I will figure this out, even when the path is unclear, begins shaping a mind that sees options where others see dead ends. Repetition is not about affirmations alone, it is about identity. You are not just repeating words, you are repeating instructions about who you believe you are. Your mind is always listening, even when you are not speaking out loud. Every internal whisper becomes a seed. Seeds grow in silence, and your thoughts follow the same principle. If you consistently plant seeds of fear, the garden of your mind will grow cautious, hesitant, defensive. If you consistently plant seeds of courage and belief, the garden will grow resilient, curious, and strong. People often underestimate this process because they expect immediate results. They want one positive thought to cancel years of self-doubt, or one moment of clarity to erase a lifetime of confusion. But your mind does not work through occasional bursts of inspiration. It works through steady repetition. If you feed it doubt every day, doubt becomes your default. If you feed it confidence every day, confidence becomes your instinct. What you repeat becomes familiar, and the mind naturally gravitates toward what is familiar because familiarity feels safe. This means you can become attached to harmful beliefs simply because you have rehearsed them for so long. You might cling to limitations not because they are true, but because they are comfortable. You might protect the very thoughts that hold you back because your mind has adopted them as part of your identity. That is the danger of repetition. It does not care whether the repeated thought elevates you or imprisons you, but repetition can also be your liberation. You can teach your mind new truths the same way you once unknowingly taught it old lies. You can replace, reframe, rewire. When you repeatedly tell yourself, I deserve better, your mind begins searching for ways to bring that statement to life. When you say, I am growing, your mind starts noticing progress instead of obstacles. When you declare, I am capable, your mind becomes more willing to take risks, more willing to stretch, more willing to endure temporary struggle for long-term growth. The words you repeat become the filter through which your mind interprets the world. Two people can face the same challenge and experience entirely different realities because of the thoughts they rehearsed beforehand. One person sees a wall, the other sees a doorway. One sees defeat, the other sees direction. One sees failure, the other sees feedback. It is not the external event that separates them, it is the internal dialogue that prepared them. Repetition does not only shape perception, it shapes behavior. People act in alignment with the identity they believe they possess. If you repeat that you're someone who gives up, you won't look for solutions when adversity strikes. Your behavior will fall in line with your belief. But if you repeat that you are someone who persists, even when your legs shake and your voice trembles, you will keep pushing long after others stop. Persistence becomes natural because your mind believes persistence is who you are. The same principle applies to self-worth. If you repeatedly tell yourself that you are not enough, you will unconsciously gravitate toward situations that confirm that belief. You will tolerate relationships that drain you, opportunities that diminish you, and environments that shrink you. But if you repeat that you are worthy, your mind will direct you away from anything that contradicts that identity. It will steer you toward what nourishes rather than what depletes. The shift begins not with the world around you, but with the words within you. Silence is not absence. Silence is presence in its most concentrated form. It is the space where truth settles after the noise has exhausted itself. People often misunderstand silence. because they associate it with inactivity, with withdrawal, with nothing happening. But silence is not the absence of movement. It is the birthplace of understanding. The world trains us to fear quiet moments, to believe that stillness means stagnation. Yet silence is where the mind unclutters, where the heart recalibrates, and where clarity steps forward without having to compete with chaos. When everything around you is loud, when expectations, opinions, and pressures stack on top of one another, silence becomes the only environment where you can hear what actually matters. It is the environment where you begin to separate what you want from what you've been told to want. Silence gives you room to distinguish between the voice of your soul and the echoes of your surroundings. In silence, you start to realize how many of your decisions were shaped by noise. You notice how much of your anxiety was inherited, how many of your fears came from borrowed narratives, how many of your limitations were absorbed simply because they were loud and repeated. When you step back into silence, you reclaim ownership of your inner world. You create a sanctuary where external judgment cannot intrude. Silence is not the void, it is the filter. It traps the unnecessary and lets the essential pass through. The thoughts that survive silence are the ones rooted in your truth, not in your insecurity. That is why silence is powerful. It reveals what noise tries to hide. It brings forward the answers you were too busy to hear. It exposes the solutions that get drowned out by distractions. Silence is also where strength gathers. The strongest moments of transformation rarely happen in the spotlight. They happen behind closed doors, in the quiet hours when no one is watching. Growth does not always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it crawls, sometimes it breathes so softly that the world mistakes it for nothing at all. But silence is where you rebuild what life tried to break. It's where you face yourself without masks, without applause, without performance. And when you can meet yourself in silence, your fears, your flaws, your hopes, your contradictions, you become unshakable. Because the person who knows themselves deeply cannot be easily manipulated by the temporary noise of life. People fear silence because silence forces honesty. Noise makes it easy to avoid the difficult questions. Silence makes avoidance impossible. In silence, you confront the truth about what inspires you and what drains you, what you've outgrown and what you've been clinging to, what you should release and what you must protect. Silence strips away excuses and reveals the real reasons behind your choices. It uncovers the motives hidden under habits. It shows you the difference between what feels familiar and what feels right. That kind of revelation can be uncomfortable, which is why so many people avoid silence. But if you seek growth, if you seek direction, if you seek alignment, silence is the classroom where your next level is taught. Silence is not passive. It is an active force that rearranges your inner landscape. It sharpens intuition. It strengthens emotional intelligence. It heightens awareness. When you give yourself permission to withdraw from noise, even temporarily, you begin to hear patterns you once missed. You notice the tone behind your own thoughts. You catch yourself repeating ideas that no longer belong to you. You recognize emotional triggers that once felt automatic. Silence creates enough space for you to gain control over reaction that once controlled you. It gives you the vantage point to see your own life with a wider lens. And silence is not loneliness. Loneliness is the pain of being disconnected. Silence is the practice of reconnecting to yourself, to your purpose, to your values, to what truly matters. Silence gives you the opportunity to rebuild from the inside without interference. It teaches you that your worth is not validated by constant activity. It shows you that your identity is not defined by constant noise. In silence, you learn the difference between movement and progress. Not every step is forward. Not every sound is meaningful. Not every voice is worth your attention. Silence gives you the power to choose intentionally instead of reacting reflexively. Silence is not absence. It is alignment waiting to be heard. You must confront the narrator, not the narrative. The stories you tell yourself about your life are not born from events alone. They are shaped by the voice interpreting those events. Two people can walk through the same storm and walk away with entirely different meanings, not because the storm was different, but because the narrator inside them told a different story. The human mind is constantly weaving explanations, conclusions, and assumptions about what happens, and over time, that internal narrator becomes far more powerful than the circumstances themselves. The narrative you believe is simply the product of the narrator you have allowed to speak the loudest. If that narrator is wounded, everything looks like a threat. If that narrator is fearful, everything feels risky. If that narrator is insecure, everything becomes a judgment. The issue is rarely the moment you are living, it is the voice that defines what that moment means. When you confront the narrator, you begin to understand why certain patterns repeat in your life. You start to see how your interpretations have shaped your reactions. You may discover that the narrator you've been listening to was shaped long ago by childhood messages, past heartbreaks, failures you never processed, or environments that taught you to stay small. That narrator learned to protect you by filtering life through caution, through skepticism, or through self-doubt. But protection can become imprisonment when the narrator never grows. If you allow an old narrator to tell new stories, the narrative will always feel outdated. Your life may be evolving, but your interpretation stays stuck in the past. Confronting the narrator means questioning the voice that automatically labels you, limits you, or speaks for you before you even get a chance to speak for yourself. The narrative of "I'm not good enough" is not the problem. The problem is the narrator who concluded that somewhere along the line. Your job is not to argue with the narrative, but to ask the narrator where that belief came from, why it persists, and whether it still deserves authority. The narrative of "I always mess things up" isn't the true prison. The narrator who holds on to guilt and refuses to acknowledge growth is the one keeping you bound. You cannot change your life. If you only edit the story, you must engage the storyteller. You must challenge the tone, the assumptions, the biases inside your own mind. This is not easy work because the narrator often disguises itself as truth. It sounds familiar. It sounds like you. It sounds logical. But familiarity is not accuracy, and logic built on past wounds is still flawed. When you confront the narrator, you reclaim control over the meaning you assign to your experiences. You begin to separate fact from interpretation. A setback is not a failure until the narrator labels it one. A delay is not a denial until the narrator assumes rejection. A mistake is not a definition until the narrator turns it into identity. Most of the suffering people carry is not caused by the event, but by the narrator who amplified it, repeated it, and reinforced it until it became a narrative they could not escape. But these narratives are not permanent. They can be rewritten when the narrator is re-educated. The moment you challenge the voice inside you is the moment you gain access to a different story. This confrontation requires honesty. You must ask yourself whether the narrator speaks from strength or from fear, whether it pushes you or punishes you, whether it guides you or traps you, whether it expands your possibilities or shrinks them. Many people realize that their narrator is not cruel because they are weak, but because it learned cruelty from environments that never valued them. People internalize the tone they were raised around. They inherit the emotional language of the people who influenced them. When you confront the narrator, you give yourself permission to break generational interpretations and personal biases that were never truly yours. Changing the narrator does not mean silencing it. It means teaching it a new dialect of truth. It means feeding it new evidence. It means introducing it to the idea that you are no longer the version of yourself it was trained to protect. When the narrator begins to shift, the narrative shifts naturally. Life does not become easier, but your interpretation becomes wiser. Challenges still come, but they no longer define you. Pain still visits, but it no longer becomes your identity. You start writing from empowerment rather than fear, from clarity rather than confusion, from intention rather than habit. A new narrator creates a new narrative effortlessly. Speak to yourself as you would to someone you love. Most people speak to themselves in ways they would never dare to speak to another human being. You forgive others faster than you forgive yourself. You offer compassion to friends, but you offer criticism to your own heart. You uplift others with encouragement, yet burden yourself with expectations so heavy that even the strongest foundation would crack under them. The irony is that you know how to love. You have shown it, given it, poured it into others, but you forget to direct that same tenderness inward. You overlook the fact that your mind listens to you more than it listens to anyone else. Every harsh word, every quiet insult, every internal accusation leaves an imprint. And over time, those imprints shape the way you walk through life. If you truly love someone, you do not belittle them when they stumble. You do not call them foolish for trying. You do not shame them for failing. You do not remind them of every mistake they've made. You do not predict their future through the lens of their past. Yet this is the language many people use with themselves daily. If someone you cared about was hurting, you would soften your voice. You would offer patience. You would say, take your time, you're trying, you're learning. But when you face your own difficulty, you speak with impatience and disappointment. You say, why aren't you better by now? Why do you always do this? What's wrong with you? If a loved one came to you with insecurity, you would reassure them. But when insecurity rises in you, you declare it as truth. This double standard is not strength. It is self-neglect disguised as discipline. What you say to yourself determines how you treat yourself, and how you treat yourself determines what you believe you deserve. When your internal dialogue is filled with criticism, you unconsciously begin to settle for environments, relationships, and opportunities that match that criticism. You accept less because you believe you are less. When your inner voice reflects kindness, everything about your life shifts. You demand more because you believe you deserve more. You stop chasing validation because you stop questioning your worth. You begin healing because your internal world becomes a safe place to land instead of a battlefield you fear returning to. Speaking to yourself like someone you love is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. Think of the people you cherish. You see their potential even when they can't see it themselves. You remind them that growth takes time. You give them the benefit of the doubt. You see the good in them even when they are struggling. Now imagine offering that same grace to yourself. Imagine waking up and saying, I'm proud of you for trying. Imagine saying you don't have to be perfect to be worthy. Imagine reminding yourself that you are allowed to rest, allowed to change, allowed to be human. Comforting yourself in moments of fear instead of attacking yourself for feeling afraid. This is not weakness. This is the foundation of emotional resilience. When you speak to yourself with love, you create an internal environment where healing becomes possible. Your nervous system calms. Your confidence grows. Your perspective widens. You stop operating from self-protection and start operating from self-belief. You stop bracing for rejection and start opening yourself to opportunities. The tone you use with yourself becomes the tone of your entire life. If it is harsh, life feels harsh. If it is gentle, life feels navigable. The shift begins not with circumstances, but with language. Speaking to yourself with love also means challenging your own unkind thoughts. If someone you care about said, "I'm worthless," you wouldn't agree. You wouldn't reinforce that belief. You would challenge it with truth. You would remind them of who they are. You would tell them what they cannot see in that moment. You must learn to do the same with yourself. When your mind says you're failing, counter it with "you're learning." When it says nobody cares, remind yourself, "I deserve care." When it says you'll never make it, answer with, "I'm still moving forward." You cannot always control the first thought that appears, but you can always choose the second one. The inner voice you use becomes the emotional climate you live in. If you want a life with more peace, speak to yourself peacefully. If you want a life with more confidence, speak to yourself confidently. If you want a life with more strength, speak to yourself with encouragement. Every word you offer yourself either builds you or breaks you. The love you give to others is powerful, but the love you offer yourself is transformative. Inner dialogue determines inner drive. The way you speak to yourself becomes the fuel that powers your momentum, or the weight that drags your spirit to a standstill. You cannot build a driven life on a defeated inner voice. You cannot expect consistent action from a mind that is constantly being sabotaged by its own thought. Momentum is not just a product of motivation. It is a product of the internal messages that shape how you interpret challenge, failure, success, and effort. Before you take a step forward in the world, you take a step forward in your mind. And if that internal step is hesitant, critical, or fearful, your outer steps will always reflect the same hesitation. Inner drive is deeply connected to belief, and belief is shaped by repetition. If your inner dialogue is filled with doubt, every attempt you make feels risky. If your inner dialogue is filled with discouragement, even your small victories feel insignificant. When you repeatedly tell yourself that things are too hard, your mind begins to treat difficulty as danger. The moment a challenge arises, your energy drops, your motivation withers, your instinct becomes avoidance rather than engagement. But when your inner dialogue says, "I can handle this," challenges become manageable. When it says, "I'll figure it out," obstacles become opportunities to grow. When it says, "keep going," the mind shifts from fear to focus. Drive is not a mysterious force some people are born with. It is the byproduct of an internal voice that supports action rather than suffocates it. People often believe that they lack discipline when what they truly lack is supportive inner dialogue. Discipline thrives in an environment of encouragement. It weakens in an environment of criticism. You will not push yourself consistently if your inner voice punishes every imperfection. You will not pursue long-term goals if your inner voice labels every setback as failure. You will not stretch beyond your comfort zone if your inner voice constantly questions your capability. Inner drive grows strongest when your internal dialogue recognizes effort, celebrates progress, and reinforces resilience. When you acknowledge your growth, even in small ways, you create a positive feedback loop that fuels your desire to keep moving. Consider the moments when you wanted to quit something meaningful. The external challenge wasn't the real trigger. It was the internal voice that whispered, "Maybe you're not good enough," or "this is impossible," or "what's the point?" If you had heard a different voice, one that said, "It's hard, but you're capable," or "keep pushing," this is how progress feels. Your behavior would have changed. The challenge wouldn't have vanished, but your drive to overcome it would have strengthened. This is the power of inner dialogue. It can either shut down your determination or ignite it. Inner drive. also depends on how your internal voice talks about your past. If your inner dialogue constantly reminds you of your previous mistakes, your energy will always be stuck in what already happened. You cannot run towards your future while dragging the weight of old narratives. If your inner dialogue reframes the past as preparation rather than punishment, your drive increases. When you see your failures as lessons, you stop fearing them. When you see your obstacles as training, you stop avoiding them. When you see your history as evidence that you've survived before, you stop doubting your ability to survive again. The past becomes a source of fuel rather than a source of shame. Your inner dialogue also determines how long you stay committed. Drive is not just about starting strong, it is about continuing when the initial excitement fades. Consistency is built not through constant motivation, but through the internal voice that shows up on the days when you feel tired, discouraged, or uninspired. That voice can say, it's okay to take a breath, but don't stop. It can say, this moment is temporary. It can say, you've come too far to turn back now. Without that supportive internal guidance, it becomes easy to lose direction. But with it, you learn to push through emotional fluctuations and maintain steady movement. The truth is, your inner voice is the coach you hear the most. It's there in the morning when you wake up, influencing your tone for the day. It's there when you face conflict, shaping how you respond. It's there when you dream about your future, determining whether you see possibility or impossibility. Drive doesn't disappear overnight. It is drained slowly by an unsupportive inner narrator, and it is built slowly by a consistent, encouraging one. You cannot control every circumstance, but you can control the voice that travels with you into each one. And that voice ultimately dictates how far, how fast, and how faithfully you will go. You are the gatekeeper of your mind. Every thought that enters, every belief that stays, every idea that shapes your life must pass through a gate, and you are the one who decides what gets permission to remain. Most people don't recognize this power. They live as if their mind is an open field where anything can grow. Fear, doubt, insecurity, discouragement, old memories that drain them, and new worries that suffocate them. But your mind is not an uncontrolled landscape. It is a protected territory. And the moment you realize you have authority over what enters it, your entire life changes. You cannot stop every thought from knocking, but you can decide which thoughts get to unpack their bags and stay. Being the gatekeeper begins with awareness. Many people live on autopilot, allowing any internal voice to become truth simply because it speaks loudly or frequently. But volume is not validity. Repetition is not reality. Just because a thought appears does not mean it deserves ownership. When you start observing your thoughts instead of absorbing them, you reclaim control. You notice which thoughts uplift you and which drain you. You notice which thoughts come from past wounds and which come from genuine intuition. You notice which thoughts are rooted in fear and which are rooted in possibility. Awareness is the first act of gatekeeping because you cannot guard what you do not see. The next step is discernment. Not every thought that feels familiar is beneficial. Some harmful beliefs have lived in your mind for so long that they feel like home. They feel like truth simply because you've never challenged them. But being the gatekeeper means questioning the thoughts that walk into your mind with confidence. When a thought says you're not capable, you ask based on what? When a thought says you always fail, you ask, is that fact or habit? When a thought says you're not worthy of better, you examine where that belief originated. Discernment is how you separate the inner voice that protects you from the inner voice that limits you. Without discernment, you mistake every loud thought for wisdom. As the gatekeeper, you must also develop the courage to say no. Some thoughts feel powerful not because they're true, but because they've been allowed to linger for too long. Fear becomes persuasive when it is never confronted. Doubt becomes dominant when it is never challenged. Insecurity becomes permanent when it is never questioned. Courage does not mean you never experience negative thoughts. Courage means you refuse to let them stay. It means telling your mind, this thought can visit, but it cannot live here. It means refusing to be a host of beliefs that shrink your potential or drain your energy. Saying no to a thought is an act of self-protection just as important as locking a door to keep danger out. You are also responsible for what you allow to enter from the outside world. Your mind is not only shaped by internal thoughts, but by external voices. Family, friends, media, culture, environment. If you do not guard your gate, other people's fears become your fears. Their limitations become your narrative. Their negativity becomes your mindset. Protecting your mind means being selective about the conversations you engage with, the people you surround yourself with, the content you consume, and the environments you remain connected to. It means recognizing that not every voice deserves access to your inner world. Some people speak from their wounds, and if you let those words pass your gate unchecked, their wounds become your worldview. As the gatekeeper, you must also intentionally choose what to allow in. A gatekeeper is not only someone who keeps harmful thoughts out, but someone who welcomes helpful thoughts in. Encouragement, gratitude, discipline, clarity, compassion, confidence, these must be invited, rehearsed, and repeated. You strengthen your mind by feeding it the thoughts that build you rather than the thoughts that break you. You cultivate resilience by allowing in perspectives that expand you. You grow by welcoming truths that challenge you to rise. The mind thrives when it is nourished, and you are responsible for the menu. Being a gatekeeper also means maintaining the gate. You do not clean your mind once and remain protected forever. Thoughts are persistent. Old beliefs try to return. Negative patterns attempt to slip back in when you are tired, stressed, or distracted. Consistency is essential. You must check in with yourself regularly. You must notice when harmful thoughts begin creeping back. You must reinforce the boundaries that guard your peace. A strong mind is not the result of perfection. It is the result of consistent maintenance. Once you embrace your role as gatekeeper, life begins to feel different. You stop feeling controlled by your thoughts and start feeling responsible for them. You stop being overwhelmed by your mind and start being in partnership with it. You stop reacting and start choosing. And from that place of choice, you build an inner world that supports your growth, your clarity, your strength, and your purpose.